dangerous as a mother. Hey, you know, that Ronald Reagan had a way with words, you know, and he, almost like Gil Scott-Heron, remember his classic from that era about the B movie and the ray gun. It was all about inflation. Things were ripping the economy apart. My sister's Nell got bit by a rat in Whitey's on the Moon. Who remembers, who can forget that Gil Scott-Heron classic? Anyway, my point is this. Inflation is back to Reagan era period of time. And the policies, therefore, are being revisited. Where were we back then? Who was in charge? Who was running the central bank? Why is it happening again? And have we learned anything?
Of course, back then, what we had was the Arab oil embargo. We had the Iran Revolution, which also led to similar spike in prices in oil. We had just gone off the gold standard in 1971, and there was like a 10-year period of trying to maintain confidence in the dollar because the global community wasn't quite sure whether an all fiat world was sustainable. And we had Paul Volcker brought in the later 70s to make sure that Bitcoin, well, not Bitcoin, that's our new standard, but to make sure that US Treasuries were considered as good as gold. So he jacked interest rates up to near 20%. Of course, we're not going to go there. Right now, we have CPI inflation at 9.1%.
Right. Well, I guess we have to look at this historically and comment on the fact that typically you would have something called the business cycle where supply and demand get out of balance and the economy goes into a recession, prices come down, and the whole cycle begins again. But starting under Alan Greenspan, who was the Fed chairman brought on during the Reagan era, the era of the activist Fed chairman began, and the era of the Greenspan put, and then the Bernanke put, the Janet Yellen put, and the Jay Powell put began, where no market sell-off wasn't too big to make more money available to Wall Street. Then Wall Street separated completely from Main Street, and the percentage of the US economy that was finance went from 2 or 3% to probably 20 or 25% all inclusive. And we became dominated by monetary charlatans, as I would describe it. But every once in a while, like we're having right now, reality reasserts itself. The prices of stuff cannot be manipulated through monkeying about with the money supply, and that's where we're at now.
So, well, we'll read another quote from another person. This is an economist, John Maynard Keynes, who is kind of the opposite ideologically of Ronald Reagan, and what he said about inflation to understand what we're going through.
Right, that's a good point, is that the trend is toward those in charge of the money printing have the legal ability to go into people's lives and confiscate their wealth in a number of different ways. And that trend just gets more pernicious and underhanded as the situation gets worse. So the problem is, of course, when you have no accounting that is transparent and hews to a model that everyone agrees is in everyone's best interest. We have different forms of accounting in the United States and around the world, and depending on who you talk to, they account for things differently. Somehow, those who are printing all the money see prices completely differently than those who are experiencing price gouging and price inflation. So these two never come together, and it causes social unrest. And so, but one thing that's different than the early 1980s is that there was less awareness during the early 1980s that inflation is directly the result of money printing. There was still a debate about inflation being caused by demand on the demand side of the equation and et cetera. But I think that the millennials and the Gen Z understand that this is a direct result of just rampant money printing that's completely unaccounted for, done for in the service of a few at the top. Right, well, let's put this into context. We've been talking about this, you cannot taper a Ponzi scheme. We've been saying that for a long time. And so now they are raising rates. Jay Powell and the rest of the global central banks are raising rates for the first time in a long, long time. And the results are market chaos and soaring dollar, causing hardship in other countries around the world. So they are trying to get to a place called interest rate neutrality. and do so in a way that doesn't catastrophically, completely destroy the global economy. And so that's at this moment. This is where we're at. The need to take interest rates in the U.S. up another 100 100 basis points or higher. This has been cited as being the neutral rate. Would that have the effect of causing mass defaults on debts across the board? Ultimately, as you point out there, when they get to a point where they believe they're at, quote, neutrality, they will have to open the floodgates of money once again. And people are suffering. And so the calculus that's being made is, at what point will the blowback be so great as to threaten us who are doing the money printing? They feel at the moment not to be in any physical harm's way. And so they will continue to tinker until the flames of the public outrage are at the doorstep. And then they will start to flood again, and the victims will be the victims, and we won't hear from them again. It's been an awfully eventful past few months as the Terra Luna UST collapse triggered a wave of liquidations across the shitcoin market, and many hedge funds and Ponzi's imploded along with the liquidations. What are your big takeaways on the aftermath?
So this is our Lehman Brothers of a crypto moment. It showed that the systemic risk by adding layers and layers and layers on top of this industry. And so really the big takeaways are as follows, that there was a collateralized lending market that was created, and there were stable coins that were created. Really we have seen that pristine collateral is very, very important. And so when lots and lots of these coins have been backed by Bitcoin, so there was a stable coin that was backed by Bitcoin. We've seen that if you don't have a stable coin backed by dollars, that becomes important because you can no longer maintain the peg when you have the volatility of Bitcoin. And when you have other collateralized loans that are essentially backed by unlicensed.
We get to relive the Lehman Brothers moment. How great. Hey, Bitcoin was collateral for all these failed yield farming schemes. So the liquidations have seen massive sell-offs in Bitcoin prices as well. Have we hit bottom? More liquidations to come. Simon?
There's a few more systemically risky events. So there's lots of restructuring going on right now. There's lots of bankruptcies. There's still a bit more to unwind in this market until we can stabilize to some normality. It's Bitcoin was the collateral behind some of these things. And so there may be one more shakeout till we can start to look at the next cycle and move forward. Or depending on the outcome of those, we may not get any more liquidations in where they have to sell their Bitcoin in order to save some of these unlicensed, unregistered, unlicensed banks and securities businesses.
Well, individuals are free to choose whether or not to get wrecked on these obvious Ponzi schemes. These same DeFi projects, and now the latest thing, the metaverse, have descended upon places like El Salvador, and wherever Bitcoin is adopted, should nation states